This is a reading from The Sinner's Guide by Luis de Granada. Luis de Granada. Luis de Granada was a revered Catholic theologian of the 16th century, but he preferred to be a preacher and writer, and today it is for his books that he is best remembered. He published some 45 books, and of those, The Sinner's Guide is his best known. Luis was born of poor parents in 1504 in the city of Granada. Today, it is the capital of the province of Granada in southern Spain. It is located about 30 miles north of the Mediterranean coast and is about equidistant, east to west, between the cities of Seville and Cartagena. With his great intellectual ability, he received a superior education and entered the Catholic religious life. In 1551, he transferred to Portugal, where he spent most of the remainder of his life. He died on December 31st, 1588, in Lisbon. As an introduction to the life of Luis and to his books, we've included below two short biographies, both written from a Catholic perspective. For a brief overview, we begin with the official entry about Luis that was included in the 1910 edition of the Catholic Encyclopedia. It will introduce you to the outlines of Luis's life. The second biography is taken from an article published in 1922 in the journal Dominicana. It expands the account and will provide you fuller details about both Luis's life and his writing. Venerable Luis of Granada, J.B. O'Connor, The Catholic Encyclopedia, New York, Robert Appleton Company, 1910. At the age of 19, Luis was received into the Dominican order in the convent of Santa Cruz, Granada. With a mentality of the highest quality and the gift of unremitting application, he united a profoundly spiritual character that promised a brilliant and fruitful career in the service of the Church. His philosophical studies finished, he was chosen by his superiors to represent his convent at the College of St. Gregory at Valladolid, an institution of the Dominican order reserved for students possessed of more than ordinary ability. Here he acquitted himself with rare distinction, not only in the regular ecclesiastical courses, but in the humanities, to which he gave special attention at the request of his superiors. His studies completed, he at once entered upon the career of a preacher, in which he continued with extraordinary success during 40 years. The fame of his preaching spread beyond the boundaries of his native land, and at the request of the Cardinal Infante, Dom Henrique of Portugal, son of King Manuel, he was transferred to the latter country, where he became provincial of the Portuguese Dominicans in 1557. His extraordinary sanctity, learning, and wisdom soon attracted the attention of the Queen Regent, who appointed him her confessor and counselor. The bishopric of Viseu and the archbishopric of Braga were successively offered to him, only to be courteously but firmly refused. The honors of the cardinalate offered to him by Pope Sixtus V were also declined. Among the hundreds of eminent ascetical writers of Spain, Luis of Granada remains unsurpassed in the beauty and purity of his style, the solidity of his doctrine, and the popularity and influence of his writings. Besides ascetical theology, his published works treat of scripture, dogma, ethics, biography, and history. He is best known, however, for his ascetical writings. The appreciation of their worth extended throughout Europe and later to America, and their popularity still remains but little impaired after the passage of 400 years. Nearly all of these works were translated into the various European languages and several into Turkish and Japanese. The best known of his ascetical writings, and the one that achieved the greatest measure of success, is The Sinner's Guide, La Guía de Pecadores. This work was published at Badajoz in 1555. It is marked by a smooth, harmonious style of purest Spanish idiom that has merited for it the reputation of a classic, and by an unctuous eloquence that has made it a perennial source of religious inspiration. It has been most favorably compared with a Kempis's Imitation of Christ. Within a comparatively short time after its first appearance, it was translated into Italian, Latin, French, German, Polish, and Greek. A new and revised English translation was published at New York in 1889. His memorial of the Christian life, Memorial de la Vida Cristiana, is almost equally well known. In 1576, he published at Lisbon a Latin work on the principles of pulpit oratory, Rhetoricae Ecclesiasticae, sive de ratione concionandi. It enjoyed an extensive vogue not only in Spain, but in most of the countries of Europe. New editions appeared successively at Venice, 1578, Cologne, 1578, 1582, 1611, Milan, 1585, and Paris, 1635. A Spanish translation was published at Madrid in 1585. To illustrate the principles embodied in this work, a volume of this author's sermons, marked by great purity of style and deep religious feeling, was published 7 years after his death. In all, some 27 works are attributed to his pen. A Latin edition of all his writings was published by Andrew Schott and Michael of Iselt at Cologne in 1628-29. A complete edition of his ascetical works was brought out at Madrid in 1679 by Dionysius Sanchez Moreno, O.P., and a complete edition of his sermons in French at Paris in 1868. Venerable Luis of Granada, Dionysius Müller, Dominicana, Volume 7, Chapter 2, September 1922. Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain helped Columbus to discover this continent, North America. These same sovereigns gave the death blow to the well-nigh immortal foe of Christendom in the conquest of Granada by breaking the power of the Moor and expelling him from Europe. To populate the land vacated by the Moor, they offered Spanish settlers many inducements and privileges. Among other adventurers, enticed by such prospects, came a young couple from the extreme northwestern province of Galicia, bearing the name of Sarria. They were of ancient and honest Christian origin, but they were poor. Consequently, when Sarria, the head of the family, died, his wife and her tender child were dependent on charity. This little child was the future Luis of Granada, and under these circumstances was he born in 1504, the year that records also the birth of the great Dominican Pope, St. Pius V. Luis quarreled with a playmate outside the castle walls of the Duke, Conde de Tendilla, Alcalde of Alhambra, the governor of that territory. The Duke interfered, and, greatly impressed by Luis's able defense of himself and by his winning disposition, undertook the youth's education. Thus was he enabled to learn Latin with the Duke's own son. Although worldly honors now loomed up before him, an interior light shone brighter, and Luis unhesitatingly followed the inspiration. It was a Dominican vocation. He felt keenly the separation from his poor mother, but he did not forget her. As a novice, he daily set aside a half of his own meager dinner and sent it to her. The time for profession had come, and leaving aside the name of Sarria, Luis assumed the name of Granada. His heart was full of joy. He respected and loved and observed the Dominican rule, with its rigorous fast, and to it he added the frequent use of the discipline. All loved him for his modesty, cheerfulness, and good sense. He spoke little, reflected much, and profited by everything for his advancement. He had many lovable qualities, and his spirit made him esteemed. He seemed insensible to honors. Footnote: Antoine Touron, O.P. Histoire des hommes illustres de l'Ordre de Saint-Dominique, Paris, 1743 to 1749, Book 30, Louis de Grenade, Paragraph 3. Luis's clear, strong mind soon revealed itself to his teachers and superiors, and they conceived the most flattering future for him. Accordingly, he was sent to an institution of higher education of the order, the convent of St. Gregory of Valladolid, that school of arts and sciences where Medina, Banez, and Francis Vitoria, and many sculptors and painters distinguished themselves. His teacher was Astudillo, declared by Vitoria to be a more learned theologian than himself, while one of his fellow novices was the renowned Melchior Canor. The classic and spiritual opportunities of the institution made greatest appeal to the young disciple. Luis, after having shown that his intellect penetrated the deepest subtleties of scholastic theology, found it more congenial to his nature to follow the study of humanities and of mystical theology. This study was now to produce the most astounding results. Having completed his course, Luis returned to his mountainous birthplace in Granada, where he began his active ministry. For 40 years he was engaged in constant toil in the pulpit and the confessional, and as advisor. Innumerable were the converts he brought over to the church. His fame as a preacher rapidly spread over Spain and Portugal. Cardinal Henry of the latter country earnestly sought him as an advisor. Only when that prelate had appealed to the Master General and secured a command of obedience could Granada be induced to assume a position of so great honor and responsibility. Portugal soon learned his merits, and the Queen Regent, Catherine, sister of Emperor Charles V, made him advisor in state affairs and her own confessor. As prior at Badajoz, where he rebuilt the convent, Luis was chosen provincial of that territory, despite a feeling that none other than a Portuguese should be chosen as provincial. Upon his refusal to accept the post, the Portuguese fathers appealed to Cardinal Henry, who induced him to take the office. About this time there was a vacancy in the time-honored see of Braga. Many ecclesiastics of social and political preferments sought the position and brought pressure to bear on the good Queen Regent. She was adamant in her policy of seeking the most worthy for every position, and selected Luis. When he refused to accept, she laid it upon his conscience to secure a worthy successor to that see. The result was the selection of Bartholomew of the Martyrs, a Dominican who shed a luster upon that see and who won from the Church the title of Blessed. The name of Father Luis spread throughout all Europe, and he was admired and consulted by men of the highest rank in Church and State. The King of Spain and many cardinals honored him with marks of great esteem. Footnote, Bularium Op. Tom V, page 410. Pope Gregory XIII writes to him, "Long and continued has been your labor among men, both to deter them from vice and to lead them to the perfection of the Christian life, with which endeavor we have been infinitely pleased." Footnote 3, Lives of some of the Sons of St. Dominic by a Father of the same order, page 266. Cardinal Michael Bonelli, nephew of Pope Pius V and papal legate to Portugal, was much impressed by his virtues and works, and sent him money for the poor. Pope Sixtus V wished to enhance the glory of the cardinalate by adding Luis to that august body, but Luis refused. Toward the close of his career, the great Dominican received a certain token of the order's affection, when the Master General bestowed on him the title of Master of Sacred Theology in recognition of his labors. History enshrines this great Spaniard for his preaching power, his writings, and his saintliness. Thus, an idea of his excellence in these fields is necessary. From his boyhood, Luis of Granada evinced a rare, unmistakable talent for pulpit oratory. He attended the Lenten sermons with the Duke and his family, and in the evenings of each day would repeat the words and imitate the gestures of the Dominican preacher. To his spirit of recollection, his many lovable qualities, his deep theological knowledge, his knowledge of the Fathers and the classics, he united all the external qualities required of a good preacher. He had a clear and ringing voice, clear enunciation, and commanding presence. He had a precious unction, great powers of persuasion, and above all, the gift of placing himself at once, as if by instinct, on a level with his audience. He was successful in preaching to a variety of audiences. Now he would speak in some secluded village church, and on the next occasion he would speak in the presence of the royalty and highest clergy in the cathedral. On one occasion, the church being filled with a gathering of notables, he espied his mother at the door, looking for a seat. "I pray you," Luis said, "let that poor woman pass. She is my mother." At his word, all made way for her, and ladies of highest rank readily offered her their seats. Luis's success was unbounded, and because of his countless conversions, he became known among many as the Chrysostomum of the Latin Church. Even today, he is popularly styled the Cicero of Spain. In his later days, wishing to hand down to posterity the implements of his labors and the means of his success, he published a work titled The Christian Orator, wherein he crystallized the principles of pulpit oratory. Turon says of this work that it cannot be recommended too insistently to those young monks who are one day destined to preach the word of God. Posterity remembers a great man better by his writings than by his deeds. Great as Luis was as a preacher, even greater did he reveal himself in his writings. The works attributed to him are for the most part theological and ascetical. Of his moral theology, Father Prumer says that it possesses great merit, especially when treating of the virtues and vices. Besides works such as a dialogue on the Incarnation and his treatise on principal mysteries of the life of our Lord, Luis wrote one very extensive catechism and another in abridged form, which later became very popular, and a volume of which was presented by a Venetian nobleman to the king of Persia. Of his theology we need no better commentary than the words of St. Francis de Sales. Have by you Luis of Granada entire. Let him be your second breviary. St. Charles of Borromeo had no other theology to preach but Luis of Granada, yet he preached very well. Concerning Luis's treatise on prayer and meditation, Turon says that the work contains so great depth of doctrine and of religion, maxims so pure and sentiments so elevating, that with good show of reason, the learned French scholar Nicolas Antoine asserts that no writing of its kind in whatever language and of whatever age had he known that should be preferred to it. This was the first of his ascetical works. Soon appeared the Sinner's Guide, which has frequently been compared to the Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ, which was perhaps modeled after that work, since Luis translated it into Spanish. The Memorial of a Christian Life and treatises on prayer, the love of God, piety, and other spiritual subjects appeared in rapid succession. His works, some 27 in number, were translated into nearly all the languages. They are read in all parts of Europe, in Asia, Africa, the Indies, and our own continent, and have been published in many editions in the various countries of Europe. Only a few of his works have been translated into English. Of these, The Sinner's Guide is most widely read. Today, in several dioceses in Spain, an indulgence is granted to those who read or hear read some portion of his works. The present-day literature of Spain does not boast of writers more familiar with the genius of that language than was the great Dominican friar of the 16th century. Owing to his idiomatic style, many give him precedence to Cervantes, and consequently to all Spanish prose writers. The greatest critics of our day, notably Menendez y Pelayo and Chejador, are his admirers. His classical productions are carefully studied and imitated in many Spanish universities today for the purity and richness of their diction. That greatest of Spanish statesmen, who sways the minds and hearts of his people by a charming oratory and powerful thought, expresses the popular sentiment concerning the literary values of Luis's writings. If, says Mella, in the works of Cervantes the Castilian prose flows richly, abundantly, and harmoniously, and in those of Saavedra Fajardo it appears severe, concise, and energetic, and in those of Solis as florid and eloquent, while having such marvelous writers in that age of glory, in none, as in Father Luis of Granada, did the Castilian language attain so great majesty and grandeur. Footnote: Rosas y Espinas of January 1920. The Christian orator, the symbol of the faith, and the Sinner's Guide are probably the most finished of his productions in Spanish, while his Life of Bartholomew of the Martyrs, although uncompleted, ranks as a foremost classic of the Portuguese language. The eloquence and learning of Luis was surpassed by his sanctity. His spirit was essentially Dominican, and he manifested an unquenchable thirst to redeem souls. He was after the divine model, a zelator animarum, ardent soul. From the pulpit to the confessional, from the confessional to those in need of private spiritual advice, thence to his cell, to his great spiritual works, every moment and in every way he strove to save souls. Those high in sanctity sought his advice. Among them was the great Saint Teresa of Avila, who writes in a letter, "Among the many persons who love in the Lord your reverence for having written such holy and profitable doctrine, and who thanks his Majesty for having permitted you to be of so great and universal benefit to the souls. I am one. Footnote, Works of Saint Teresa, ed Apostolate of the Press, page 41. It has been well said that among the hundreds of eminent ascetical writers of Spain, Luis of Granada remains unsurpassed in the beauty and purity of his style, the solidity of his doctrine, and the popularity and influence of his writings. Moreover, Turon testifies that Luis, by his writings and conduct, conducts a soul from the first stage of its conversion to the highest perfection of the angelic life. However high a degree of sanctity Luis of Granada had himself reached, we are compelled to admire his singular persistency in rejecting honors, his intense charity, and his relentless mortification of self by discipline and fasts. Like Saint Dominic, he was wont to keep watch before the tabernacle at night. Ever a perfect religious, he kept the minutest details of the rule to the advanced age of 84 years. Indeed, the long Advent fast brought on his final illness. Death found this great man of God amidst his brethren, consoling them and saying with them the prayers of the Church for the expiring. His memory can be perhaps best eulogized in the words of Turon. He was praised by all in Spain and in all countries where his works were known, and he merits these praises since he reflects, and in an eminent degree, all the virtues that make a Christian man, a religious man, a great man, and a perfect orator.